So welcome again to the pruning part of this program. Sandy Steinfelt from Arizona will be joining us in a little bit to talk about pruning your trees. I'm going to start by pruning bushes. What to expect. So first we're going to talk about why we prune. Then we're going to talk about pruning shrubs, which is my part. Sandy's going to talk about pruning trees, and then we'll open it up to Q&A really quickly. So first part. Ooh, not all my pictures came out. First reason that we prune is for functionality. How can that tree or that shrub best function? How can it fruit more? How can it grow better? How can the tree not get in the way of human access? Because sometimes there's a limb that's falling over and you need to prune it, or you keep on bumping into the tree. How can you create space for other plants growing below it, especially if you're creating a guild? Those are some of the reasons that we prune. Maximizing fruit and flower production, and be able to actually reach your fruits when they come, and make it not be in the way of other properties, like not being in the way of other properties. In Sandy's case, her tree is actually reaching over to the neighbors, so she had to prune that part. Air circulation is the second, and we talked about it a little bit before we started this part of the call. Is we prevent disease from excess moisture that comes from the trees sweat too. If there's too much of them together, you have more moisture. If there are too many branches crossing, too many branches together, you have more moisture, and that promotes growth for fungal disease. It promotes a good environment for breeding, especially for those borers. And also to clean up. Another purpose for pruning is we clean up debris, especially after a storm. And when there's broken branches, there's a possibility for more disease to enter in those wounds of the trees or shrubs. And any stuff coming from the ground, we also want to clean that up. Sometimes you'll have water sprouts coming straight from the ground. You want to keep that. It's like our way of just designing it better so that it becomes more optimal. The guild that you're creating becomes more optimal. Finally, we want to promote that natural pattern of beauty in nature. So there's also an aesthetic that we want to see. We want to be able to see the tree, appreciate its structure, and we also want to see that structure be a part of in the context of our whole garden, fit well. So those are some of the reasons that are major, and we will go into like minor as we go and actually start to prune a shrub. So the difference between a shrub and a tree in this case, we're just saying that this is anything that's above 20 feet, and I know that's pretty high, is considered a tree. So you guys know structurally a shrub is more compact on the bottom, but you can still make a shrub look like a mini tree if you wanted to. Oops, I just clicked the link there. All right, so there are 3. Oh no, I'm going to pause here. I'm hearing. Forgive me for 1 second because I'm trying to get rid of one. There we go. All right, so now here are some of the main types of pruning, and I'm going to do a little demo with my plant here. So if you would like to, blueberries, blackberries, and figs. Okay. Cherry, pear, apple, pomegranate plant. Okay, awesome. So blueberry would be one such a, thank you for telling me what kind of fruit trees you have, or shrubs or berries, because yes, a blackberry, we will talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to share screen again because it has those 3 types of main pruning that we were going to talk about. I'm going to try to see if I can demo them here for you guys. So if you want to, I don't know if you can, crown raising or limbing up, meaning I'm going to clear the bottom of the shrub. I'm going to do some structure pruning with this demo of a pomegranate, restoration pruning, and thinning. So I'm going to stop share so you can maybe see me a little more, and can make this bigger. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is limbing up or crown pruning. And that simply means I would like to make some space between the ground and the actual shrubbery. So this is a pomegranate tree or shrub in a pot. So what's the difference? I can make it a shrub if I prune it more often, and if I don't, such as in the case of Andrea Newman, I know your fig has become totally a tree, but you can make a fig more of a shrub too. So our pomegranates are in pots, and I feel like they're going to be perennially shrub, even though they can be tree. So I'm going to limb up. Now, these are not the ideal pruning shears, but I could not find my pruning shears today, unfortunately. I could only find my loppers because we've been doing a lot of work outside. I have a feeling, and I only have one pair of pruning shears. But the bad thing about doing this is that you might increase the surface area of the thing that you're pruning. And where you're using pruning shears, you make a nice clean cut like a surgeon, and you don't hurt the plant as much because this one might not be as sharp. But I'm going to go ahead and do some pruning at the bottom. And when I prune, I'm going to be selecting, so I'm trying to make the room between the ground and the limbs more clear. So as I'm pruning, I don't prune at an angle, and I try to prune closest to the crotch as possible, to the notch or to the node in which it came from as possible. So by not pruning at an angle, I'm making sure that that surface area where the wound will be is as small as possible. There's some more. There we go. So I've limbed it up a little bit. The next type of pruning is structure pruning, where we cut off the water sprouts and we shape it. So water sprouts are, if you were pruning a tree, sometimes they'd have a leader, you'd have a leading limb, and then you'd have things like this that are still green. Those are water sprouts, and I'm going to cut this off because for my pot, I think that's a little bit too big. And this as well. And also, so this is structure pruning, so close to the notch. And it's especially like if you were pruning a tree, you want to prune it according to where you can reach the fruit. I think Sandy will talk to that in a little bit more. Then I'm going to go to, here's Emma Kingsley, restoration pruning. So when branches cross or rub against each other, they create a wound. And we don't want that for our plants. So here, for instance, if you have, especially if, hey Sandy, thank you for hopping in. Here, for instance, here, especially if you have a storm and then the storm breaks a branch, you want to prune that pretty aggressively, down to the notch, even to the base. And so anything that's crossing, and now I'm also going into thinning what I'm doing here. So this one is crossing because, as it grows, I know it's going to be like not in the opposite direction as all the other trees. So this is a pomegranate, and this is just now I'm just thinning it. And there. The nice thing about doing this when there's no leaves right now, is that I can see everything. And so thinning provides airflow and prevention of fungal pathogens. It also helps maximize fruit production. So we thin when we have fruit trees. Oh, I stopped sharing my screen, but I'm going to the next slide. Okay, so now these are more advanced pruning techniques. They're labeled as advanced. Bonsai, I don't know anything about, But espaliering are one of those pruning techniques that I think they shouldn't be in advance because they're really easy to do. You just need some sort of a wire, and you can go, and when you see those sprouts that are still pliable, you go and tie them up to that wire, against the wire on a fence. And so it's, if you can take a little time to get those eye hooks and a wire, a gauge wire, and just wrap the wire around the eye hook before, well, screw in the eye hook and then wrap the wire and run it across to the other side. That's the majority of your efforts will be there. And the rest is just fun. It's just tying those limbs as you see them grow. This is especially good for pears. Topiary is like Edward Scissorhands, and pollarding is in order to make the fruit tree as short as possible. So now I'm going to go to my pruning videos. I hope I have enough time. Stop share and I'll go. So we have actually asked more experts to do this than us. We've actually wanted to rely on the experts more than us. So I'm going to share this. Oops.
Slower. So, and also just
sellers,
understanding their light requirements and their winter hardiness in various areas of the country or wherever you're from.
We're going to prune these
important
out.
things to think about.
I left these long for frost reasons.
Taking care of so pruning any sort of shrub.
Uh-oh, I'm getting different. Let's try that again.
We're going to prune these out. I left these long for frost reasons.
Okay.
So this in a finished prune, I'm going to go ahead. I'll leave that. I'm going to leave that there.
For frost reasons, meaning there might be a last frost still.
If we get a frost,
April 28th,
these guys, you see, these are pushing.
Uh-huh.
If these get burned, I still have other ones down here that haven't pushed.
I see.
So that's the idea, is for our mindset and protection, we're allowing it to go up and let these long ones grow, knowing we're going to come back through and cut them off.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what we're trying to do.
Our driveway that we never use.
So I got to be careful in here because it can really get clumpy. You want it out here to have more space and have more air and sunshine and all that. If they get all on top of each other, then that's where the diseases grow.
I see.
Okay, so actually I'm going to go ahead and make a commitment here. I'm going to take him out. Okay, take that big piece of wood that really opened up this area here. And that one I'm going to leave for now. Okay, but I will end up taking him out. Here's a good one here on how it's laid out, where you've got the arm out, okay, and you've got this. Now this will end up getting pruned back to about there, okay, and this one I'll prune back to about there. You don't want, in 1 year, this is all the new growth from this point here. You can see the way the wood is here in the bark. So this is older wood from the year before. This is the wood that grew last year, okay? So that's important, so you know where your buds are. So your buds are always along that new wood. The fruit will grow from the buds that grew the year before. Okay.
Oh, okay. Second year growth.
Right. With pears and other things like that, and apples, it'll be 2 years.
Is that the same for raspberries too?
Raspberries, it depends. Let's look at raspberries real quick. So
blackberries is the same as that. It will grow from the second year. The fruit. Oh, sorry. There we go. It'll come from the second year growth. So that was Doug Fabioli from Fabioli Cellars. And then the second is proper pruning techniques. Stop this here. And this was from a presentation from the US Botanical Gardens. And I actually reached out to them to ask if I could contact the speaker so that he could talk to us, but they didn't want us to connect. So I'm just going to share. This is a free, you can find this online as well. Oh, let me share the sound, otherwise you won't hear anything.
anything that I'm going to have to kind of prop up to kind of hold while I cut. I want to make sure I use the 3-cut method, and that basically prevents tearing and destroying your branch collar. And so what you want to do with these branches is to make a cut about maybe, depending on the size, anywhere from a foot from the branch collar, which is the even further down. Yep, that's the branch collar. You want to go anywhere from about an inch to a foot above that. So you want to make your first cut up at the top there, and then the second one below it on the opposite side of the branch. And what that does is that allows you to break the branch off without tearing. And as you see, it creates kind of like a breaking point, and therefore plant bark tissue and plant tissue isn't tearing, and then that takes the weight off, and then you're able to make your final cut right at the branch collar and leave it exactly flush and not destroy the branch bark ridge, which is right between the lateral branch and the branch you just cut off. So right in between those two. You don't want to damage that. That's where the cells are growing, getting ready to grow over the wound. So you don't want to destroy those, and keep it as little as surface area as possible for the tree to grow back over, shrub for that matter, grow back over. I want to get into reduction cuts. Those are proper pruning techniques that in order to it'll help you reduce the size without topping. And I don't advocate for topping of really any sort of shrub, but this will help reduce the size and promote growth in into a lateral branch, thus strengthening that lateral branch without stressing out the shrub as much as you would by topping, if that makes sense. So if I have with taller shrubs, I like to do a lot of reduction cuts. And another one, heading cuts. This term is kind of loosely good and bad. I'd say it's okay with more designed towards fruit tree pruning, but you can use it with ornamental. It basically is to kind of leave a stub, but it promotes growth of faster water sprout growth, and in fruit tree world, it's to provide shade for the fruit and whatnot. So it promotes quick growth and new flowering, and it's basically leaving a tip of basically cutting it back to a node and leaving that node or bud to start new growth. So heading cuts can be good, and depending on the situation.
So that was the gardener Craig from the U.S. Botanical Gardens, who also talks about the wrong way to prune in this next video. Second. A water sprout, they're usually the ones that grow from the leader, but they're still green, and they come, it's almost like branch, like more branches, but they're not very vigorous. They're not very, oh, thank you, Sandy. So Sandy will talk about that. Camille, I know you're here. If you're here, Camille's the one who took the pruning course. So she might have a few things also to add as to what water sprouts are. But here's the next video on how not to prune.
that drives around, and if I see something, you know, in a shopping mall or in a parking lot, and I always they always catch my eye. Just some of the crazy pruning practices that sometimes people undergo, and I just kind of shake my head at some of them, and you know, other ones I've kind of accepted as, you know, those plants can take that type of pruning. Topping is a big one that I notice a lot, and I notice it a lot mainly on trees, but also mainly on crepe myrtles specifically, more often than not, on crepe myrtles. And for the most part, I've noticed that crepe myrtles do really well, you know, and recover. With that being said, well, they also produce a lot of flowers too. But with that being said, all those knuckles are just areas for disease, and they're not very strong, and they tend to break a lot more. You know, I wouldn't advise topping on any sort of larger shrub, even crepe myrtles, but you know, it's pretty commonplace, and you know, for the most part, I'd say crepe myrtles can tolerate it. I can't say that about you know, a camellia, or a larger camellia, or like definitely not a photinia. They really do not like being topped or squared off. They really get stressed out. I've seen more so than any sort of shrub that in my work, you know, pruning days. So they just I like to shy away from it. You know, it just, to me, it looks unsightly. So topping is a big one. As far as shearing goes,
Oops, sorry, Craig.
depends.
Do you mind if I jump in? We just had a specific question
Cool.
related to topping. Why
Yes.
is it considered crepe murder and not pollarding? What's the difference between pollarding and topping?
Well, pollarding, I believe, is, here's another. It's a little bit. Pollarding is more along the lines of, I've noticed that with some London plane and sycamore trees, that you can pollard them. It's more for like shaping, and it's kind of more of like a specialty design. I don't know. They kind of go hand in hand. I don't think pollarding is the most ideal as far as plant. Pollarding and topping are along the lines of the same as far as being detrimental, but like I said, certain trees and shrubs can handle it more than others. It's one of those ones that, you know, depending on what your goal is, you know, pollarding can be beneficial. I know with London planes and sycamores, people often pollard them to reduce fungal pressure and it tends to beef up their immune system, because they're able to put out new growth, and there's a lot more biological processes going on when you force it to when you put that much stress, or force it to grow in a certain way, or pollard it for that matter. And you know, for crepe myrtles, it worked kind of well. So it's kind of back and forth depending who you talk to. So.
And Craig, could you clarify for us what exactly is topping? Is it just you just chop it right off at the top?
Topping is when you're not cutting back to any sort of node, and you're just picking a height, and you're just flat topping it, and without any sort of consideration of you know, future growth or stress on the tree or shrub. And and over time, all those wounds that you create by topping tend to invite in more pests. And if you do it all at once, and the shrub tends to have just more pest prevalence, and bugs can get into those wounds, and it's just a lot too much all at once. It's kind of in an encompassing sentence based on or referring to topping is how I see it. I mean, shrubs shouldn't be square. They should have, adequate natural look. That's my opinion really on topping and how I can kind of define that.
Thanks, Craig.
So yeah.
I'm glad we got to tackle those topping questions. Let's pop back into our other core pruning.
And just one rule of thumb is, well, I skipped shearing, but shearing is kind of another form of topping, but more for lower growing shrubs. Depending on the shrub, I mean, I know people like having hedges, and there are certain types of shrubs that do really well, and as that can tolerate a lot of shearing. Euonymus, yews. I wouldn't recommend it. I like doing a little bit more fine pruning versus just taking gas shears and shaping them into boxes. Once again, I don't really approve of shearing unless it's used in the right sort of the right job. What shearing does create for these shrubs is a stunted growth at the top, at the shearing point every season, and because of the stress that it causes, it's going to shoot up water sprouts, and every year you have to continuously chop those water sprouts down to keep that square shape. But what that leaves is, after a while, those branches, they bunch up and they become stunted, and there is tons of light that is light cannot penetrate into the center of the sheared shrub, and therefore reduces the overall health. Oftentimes trash gets stuck in there, leaves get buried in there, and you can't really see what's going on. And I think it's important to, if you're going to shear a shrub, to get in there and thin out more frequently than you would any other shrub that you're pruning.
Hey, Craig, we did have a question about specific.
Sorry, I'm going to stop here because it's 2 and I want to make sure that Sandy gets on. The link to this is in the document that I posted earlier, and I'll pop that in the chat again. But I'm going to make Sandy, I'm going to allow you to share screen here and take it away. Yes.
Okay. So I should see a share screen button, or
yeah,
right click something, right?
Welcome. So Sandy is from Arizona. She has successfully pruned her fruit trees and she's going to show us how she did it.
Okay, I am not able to see how to share my screen right now.
Okay, let me see.
There's a share screen button. I will click on that. A great big button that says share screen. That's the one. Okay. Okay. Let's make sure I can get the. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. That should get bigger, hopefully. There. Okay. So, yeah, thanks, Nikki. You brought in some good stuff and some stuff that I wish I'd thought of. So here's some of the tools. These are my tools that I use. So I have the hand pruners that everybody knows that are great, and most of it, it's just about functionality. Like use loppers for the bigger stuff, use hand pruners for smaller stuff. And I have an extendable tree pruner. So the part right here, that's a little hook. Then you pull on this string, and it goes out like I can't remember how, like 18 feet or something. You pull on the string and it can cut branches that are a certain size. And then there's this saw that I can take on and off for anything that's bigger than that. And that's super handy for pruning things that are out of reach. And a chainsaw for more extreme things. I used it yesterday. And one of the things, the 3-cut method, I wish I had seen that because one of the reasons the 3-cut method is good and other like using proper pruning techniques is it avoids pinching your whatever it is you're trying to cut with, your saw blade, whether it's a chainsaw or a saw on a pole. Like it's no fun to get that pinched in a branch when you're trying to prune a really big branch, which happened to me yesterday. And it was funny and embarrassing, but don't do that. So like prune in such a way that you're planning for where the weight's going to be, because otherwise you pinch your blade and then it's completely useless and you're stuck somewhere with a blade stuck in a tree. Also, I saw in my local Costco, again, like our winters are super mild, but my local Costco had a deal on a lopper and shear pair. So you can find stuff, there's links in the documents. I like to go get something quality. I tried getting a pole saw like this from Harbor Freight, which was cheap. And I found out enough of it to know that, okay, I know that I'm going to use this. This is a useful tool. This is the right tool for the job. But by the time that the little wing nut came loose and that little saw blade was falling through the tree branches and I wasn't sure where it was going to land, I realized it's better to just buy quality the first time. If I know I'm going to be committed to pruning, it costs a little bit more, but it's worth it to buy quality tools. And I have a video too. Dave Wilson Nursery, I went to I guess it was a couple years ago now. They gave a presentation locally here, had one of the people come out, and they make lots of fruit trees, or they sell lots of fruit trees. I'm guessing it's all over, definitely in this area though, and I wanted to show those. Let's see if I can. How do I switch over to showing that?
You can stop share, and I'm going to share. I can share for you that first.
Sure. Yeah, if you can share that pruning video. Yeah, I'll do this stop share.
Thanks.
Okay. Pause share. Okay.
All right.
This is the one, right, Sandy?
I don't see it. Yes,
Oh.
that's the one.
Okay, making sure.
Great.
The famous old Santa Rosa plum in the hedgerow.
What?
You can go back all the way to the beginning.
Oh, to the beginning?
So they have a demo nursery, and so he goes through a bunch of different things.
Oh, this was the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, I guess, yeah, it has the little technique. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
All right, it's the famous old Santa Rosa plum in the hedgerow. Of course, this is a plum that's been here for roughly about 15 years. So we're going to work this one now, a little thinning and a little pruning. Although the size on this tree is pretty good, we're going to take back the back portion of the Santa Rosa plum, a little bit high there, and we're going to open it up for sunlight and good airflow. I first start by removing some of these crossing limbs in here. I like to do this while there's fruit, while I'm thinning, because it helps to eliminate some of the fruit as well. Here's a crow's foot here, and what we'll do is I'm going to try to see what we can do just by eliminating the middle. Cut it out. That sure opened up a little bit right there. Took out some fruit. Maybe we'll take off this side one here for height. That opened up the sunlight to get and oxygen to get into the back here as well. And after a number of years of pruning, keeping trees back, you end up with problems like this occasionally. So you want to start going in and cutting your way out without cutting off too much, because if it gets hot right now, if we were to heat up real bad in the next 2 weeks and we were to expose too much of this tree's trunk, we'd risk sunburn, and then of course other damage that would be because of the sunburn. All right, there we are. We have the Santa Rosa plum, size controlled, taking the top out a little bit, thinned out so that we have plenty of air circulation now, good sunlight penetration.
Here we are this morning in Rancho Cucamonga, California, down just about 40 miles east of Los Angeles. Good low chill area. We're in my friend Joanne's fruit garden, and she has a lot of high density examples in here. She has apples, figs, plums, pluots, peaches, persimmons, a fair amount of citrus. All these varieties are planted in a espalier form, kind of a natural style espalier, using just the wire rows for initial development, and then allowing these to kind of grow out into the aisleways a little bit. This is Flavor Grenade Pluot, one of our best low chill pluot varieties for Southern California. As you can see, it has a tremendous fruit set on it. The main thing at this time, during the month of May and June and early July, you just want to keep the growth in check. You want to keep the top pinched down a little bit on it. You want to make sure that growth isn't impeding into your aisleways. So just a little bit of pruning, a little bit of cultural work at this time will make the summer growth a lot more balanced out. One of the really unique things about this landscape fruit orchard here is it's on a terrace. There's 3 steps to this terrace. So where this pluot looks a little big from my step down below, I can get up here on the next step and I can reach everything on the top. I can reach every branch, every piece of fruit. So it's all easily managed. At this time, I'm just going to come in, just check the growth up here a little bit. I don't want to do too much, but I want to make sure that I'm keeping it in balance and allowing it enough time and enough space to grow out for the rest of the summer. Here we are in Rancho Cucamonga, California. This is Double Delight Nectarine. This is actually only 2nd year in the ground. It's still a fairly young tree. It's on citation, semi-dwarfing rootstock, but it's got quite a bit of vigor. It's got a great fruit set. It's just loaded with fruit. It's done really well. The top's getting a little too big for me, so at this time, late May, I'm going to come in and just start topping it at about the height that I can reach. And that way, I'll encourage all that new growth down low in an area where it's easy to get to for next year. Okay, here it is. Just a few strategic cuts. We've got it down to a reasonable height where everything can be reached from the ground. Still a nice fruit set on it. Everything's ready to go.
And do you want that second video? You're muted, Sandy.
Let's hold off on the second video for time.
Okay.
So the so I get back. The cool thing, Dave Wilson, they have tons of awesome videos. They have a whole playlist, and I attached that playlist. So here's some of the things I've done, and it's kind of hard to see because of the lighting, but I saw some people mention they have like young trees. Young trees are like, that's the time that you can really decide what you want the trees to be, or that you want the trees, if you want them to be big, you want them to be small. And so I love Tom Spellman. He said, you know, I like trees where I can reach. So rather than having a peach tree that's so big that it's going to give you hundreds of pounds of peaches, he says, okay, I'm going to have a tree and I want it just where I can reach. I don't want it it's out of reach. I want it to be convenient and work for me. So this is, I have my stone fruit trio, I call it. I have 2 peach trees and apium planted all right next to each other. So this needed pruned. I pruned this just a little while ago. So again, like Nikki was saying, when it's winter and most of the leaves fall off, this is all a little bit more has fallen off now, but because of our mild winters, we don't have, like, one of the trees is starting to flower now and the other ones haven't lost all their leaves. But down here have, you could call these water sprouts. These are growing up from the graft. I want there to be one trunk here, not a bunch, because I'm not going for a shrub, and I definitely don't want the rootstock to be growing anything, because the rootstock isn't what's going to give me the fruit that I want. So I pruned back for getting rid of that that I didn't want, the stuff coming up from below the graft. as well as excess height that was going to be out of my reach, or because I have 3 trees here, recognizing that this little tree in the back, I want it to be able to get more sunlight during the time, like during the growing season. So making sure that they're balanced with each other. And anytime you go to prune, you want to have a purpose, knowing what is it that you're trying to do. Have another, I should be able to switch, right? Okay, so this is a branch that I pruned off of my lime tree a few days ago, and it has a couple examples of things that you want to prune off. So somebody was asking about water sprouts right here and right here. See how those are green? I get those if I don't prune them regularly. Then I have to take the loppers to get them. If it's like a year, then I need to use the loppers to get them, and they might be growing right at the base of the tree and go like 10 feet in the air, which the kids think is really cool because then they use them as like walking sticks or fighting sticks. But they're not going to be fruiting woods. They're just going to be green. They're long, straight, green, and not helpful for me. You can also see here a lot of dead wood. And I'm pruning this lime tree back because it gives me, like, for me, it's not functional. I don't need a tree that's 15 feet around. So I've been trying to prune this lime back, but trying to prune it back responsibly. So it's only a third a year. So the idea is if you have something and you want it to be smaller, don't prune more than a third every year. So yesterday, I finally did my really big, my last big cut on it to get the size down. And now I just need to make sure it recovers well from my cutting and stuff. So here's that lime tree. You can see, you can have a tree that acts like a shrub too. All citrus trees will turn into shrubs if you let them. But I'm trying to get this back so it's more this size. So it shoots up all these water sprouts that are just straight up, and you think there's all this tree, but it's not helpful tree. And so when I cut it back, it still wants to be 15 feet tall, but I don't want it to be 15 feet tall. So it's more of the extreme pruning. And if this came with the house. So if you have a young tree, you can prune it so it's used to, like that Santa Rosa plum he had at the beginning. You can prune it so it's what you want instead of having it be what it wants. So this tree I'm going to have to be struggling with for as long as I live here, that it's going to want to be 15 feet tall. And every year it's going to send out water sprouts that are going to be 10 to 15 feet high, because that's what it wants. That's what it thinks it's supposed to be. And I don't want that much lime tree because I like to have other things growing in this area. Okay. So this is my extreme fruit tree pruning. So you might think, oh, this is just fall, but citrus trees aren't deciduous. They're not supposed to lose their leaves. So this is what my grapefruit tree looked like. You can see there's dead fruit on it, lots of dead diseased branches, a little bit of green, but not much. And I'd talk to people and they say, oh, well, grapefruit trees, they have a life expectancy of about 20 years. So that's probably what it is. But I'd seen the grapefruit trees along the side of the road in my neighborhood. They had been pruning them back a lot. And this, after watching the pruning video, I can see there's things that like, this wasn't a good idea, of like the cuts that I should have cut back more solid. But I decided I'm just going to count this as a loss. It's not producing any edible grapefruit anymore, just this like gross, nasty stuff. It's not producing good grapefruit anymore. So I'm going to count it as a loss, but I'm going to give it one last chance to survive and see what happens. I'm going to cut it way back. And if it wants to survive, it can survive. And if it doesn't want to survive, then I'm going to cut the whole thing down and I'm going to put a mango tree or something else there instead that is going to produce for me. So this was kind of, okay, this is your last chance, little grapefruit. I'm going to see what you want to do. So again, like, this is not the ideal pruning, but it shows that trees are often more resilient than we think. And some trees more so than others, some can handle more. So know your tree. So I had seen that there were trees in the neighborhood that professional pruners were coming and like, oh, they're not just chopping it down. So maybe there's still hope. So I decided to try this just as an experiment. And this is what it looks like now. You can see it's grown back a lot. That was 2019, it's 2022 now. So 2.5 years. I'm getting nice fruit again. It's put out lots of green. There's not all those disease branches anymore. So I consider this like the tree decided it does want to bounce back. It does want to be happy. So this is I'm going to try something extreme and see what happens. And it's worked out good for me. So with that, opening up for any questions, any comments, any other experiences or tips other people have learned. Anybody?
I have a question.
Huh?
So is there a right and a wrong time of year to prune?
Ooh, good question. I meant to.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So, yes and no. There's different times are going to be different purposes. In the winter, it's a good time because you can see the structure on the tree if it's a deciduous tree. So the winter is a good time to do structural stuff so you can see what that skeleton is, you know where it's going. But in the summer, you might want to prune, and a lot of plants, they can still handle it if you're pruning in the summer. Some people like to prune in the summer because it helps to thin it. So you might do kind of different styles. And if you go on that playlist of Dave Wilson's, they have winter pruning, summer pruning, spring pruning, everything. So if it's uncomfortable, like for me, there is a wrong time. If I prune in the summer when it's 110 degrees out, that's bad for me because I don't like working hard in 110 degree weather outside, and it's bad for the tree because it's going to burn the trees if I cut back too much. Most people don't have that problem. So if it's extremely hot, like we're over 110 degrees for months, then that's not the time to prune. But other than that, you can prune it, and even then you wouldn't be able to prune, but I don't want to be out doing that. So when it's convenient, you can do it. And the trees I found are often more resilient than you think they are, as long as you're wise and trying to be careful about what you're doing. Good question. Anne?
We have about 15 trees in pots in our living room.
Oh, fun.
That we received about 3 weeks ago, and we can't put them in the ground because the ground is frozen. Mm-hmm. But they're starting to flower. So some of them are sturdy stalks, and some of them are puny little thin. I mean, if you bump into it, it'll break. So I saw in one of the slides to prune before and after transplanting into the ground. Is that right? Or
so I would prune to help with transplant shock. I had a mulberry bush that I transplanted, and it might have been like June or something. It was not the time to be transplanting, but I knew it would be happier in the ground than in a pot that was way too small for it. So I put it in the ground, and all its leaves fell off in the middle of summer. So I'm like, oh no, my poor mulberry is totally freaking out. So I just chopped that thing down a bunch so it could focus on the roots, and that helped. And now it's happy. It doesn't have leaves because it's still winter, but it's grown and it's happy because it helps it to. But as long as, depending on how long they're going to be in your living room, you might want to at least break off the buds, because you don't necessarily want fruit. You don't want it to focus on fruiting right now, because you want it to grow roots, and you want it to grow those roots in the ground, right?
Yes.
So I would recommend breaking off the buds. Last year I broke off the buds on my baby trees that were in the ground, and I let a couple grow because it was just too tempting to, like, I still want to eat the peaches. Yeah. And they were the best peaches. So I don't have any regrets. And the trees are still happy, and they're blossoming again this year.
Okay, thank you.
Remember also that when they're in pots, that your it's still the tree or the shrub is still trying to mimic whatever is on the top growth is what it looks like on the bottom. And when it gets root bound, it's usually because the top growth has really gone full on, and there's nowhere to grow in the pot anymore. So keeping them in pots means trying to keep them pruned.
And if they're in your living room, they probably don't realize it's still winter. Because it's not winter in your living room, hopefully,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Is it okay to, Mary Kingsley is asking, is it okay to prune the same time you are thinning the fruit in spring? So I think that's what the California Dave Wilson video.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he was doing. He said, I love pruning when there's fruit on, because then I get to do the thinning and the pruning at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my videos, they were pruning in the winter. That was given in the winter of last year. And so the reason for those, you can be more aggressive than normal if you're pruning in the winter. And then in the summer, you're a little bit less, just because you don't want to give them everything at once, like shock them into. But at the same time, those trees a lot of the fruit trees seem to be really resilient. Can you do anything with the cuttings or root them? Yes. So that's what Dave is sending you guys. So the cuttings that we sent you are from what he's pruned outside of fig, elderberry, and so if you already have, like Mary, you have elderberry already, and fig and gumi in our case, you can root them. When we send out the cuttings, we'll have the instructions as well, but I can pop that into the chat if I find it really quickly. It even has a little bit, I don't know if the video is comprehensive, but it has a little bit of instructions of how to root them. You'll need parafilm. So there's just one thing you need to buy, a pot, well, two things, a pot to root them in your soil, and the parafilm. So let me see if I can find that, and I'll pop that in. But in the meanwhile, if anybody has any other questions.
Sorry, I have one more. Nikki, you were pruning the pomegranate.
Yes.
Yeah. And so would that be something that you would then root? You would take those cuttings and root those?
Oh, these ones, I think these are too little. These are too little to root. Now, that doesn't say, I could experiment and see if they could actually, because rosemary, you can do that. Rosemary will root, basil even will root, our herbs will root from the cuttings. And it takes like a month before they start to produce the root. And then from that point, another month, and if you transplant them. So it's really slow growing, rooting things sometimes. But I would do, if I were to root a pomegranate, it would be from the limbs of a bigger pomegranate. So yeah, I would, if it could be an experiment. I have never done it from this thin, except from herbs, from this thin of a stalk, except from herbs. But I'll go find that.
Another note on rooting things. So if you have a plant that's grafted, like most of your stone fruit, apples, a lot of things, if they're grafted, if you did go to root what you pruned off of the top, it's going to be different than what it is when you have the combination of a rootstock and something different on top. So you can still root it, but you might not get what you're expecting.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, the rootstock, because when I started doing this tree business, I didn't even know what a rootstock was. There we go. That's the handout for how to root when you guys get your cuttings, or if you already have trees that you want to make cuttings from. That's the way to do it. The document that I just popped in. So a rootstock, for those of you who are not familiar with it, usually stone fruit, they don't, if you plant an apple seed, it's gonna become a tree, but it's not gonna become the tree that's the same Macintosh apple or whatever Fuji apple that you wanted it to be. Those stone fruit are usually grafted onto something called a rootstock. So it's a sturdy parent tree that may produce crab apple, but it has some characteristics that make it very sturdy. And then you graft on the tree, you graft on the branch that you want on that root stock. So if you graft on a Macintosh or whatever fruit tree you want, then it's going to produce the fruits that you desire. So So that's the difference. So rootstocks, sometimes you can grow things for their rootstocks, and then later on you'll graft different things on there, and that's how you get. You can even have a rootstock with 36 different varieties of apple that were grafted onto it. There's some crazy videos like that, but the rootstock has to be known for its vigor and its stability. So.
And your area too. So there's different. The rootstock that's going to do well here in my desert climate is not the same rootstock that's going to do well in the Pacific Northwest, where you're getting like as many rainy days as we have sunny days. Because I want something more mold resistant there and something that can handle the drier climate here. So if you have a local nursery, or you talk to people, know what's the right rootstock for your area too.
Mary asks, have you heard of using willow twigs to make a rooting solution? That's so interesting. Now, I've never heard of that. Do you want to talk to us about that, Mary, with the few minutes we have left?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know much about it. I just went to a permaculture workshop, and the instructor showed us how to, take just little cuttings from willow twigs, and you soak it in water and for, a few days, I think. And then you put your raw twigs in that solution, and they'll root much stronger and faster, and their roots will be more vigorous. So I've done that. I don't know if they're stronger than just rooting them normally, but I have a willow tree, so I've been doing it. I didn't know if anyone else knew anything about it.
That's great. That's a great advice. Great thing to try. I've heard honey, when you root things that are more, well, this has been used for smaller things like what I was saying, basil or rosemary, honey at the tip, supposedly.
The cut tip, honey at the cut tip.
The cut tip, yes.
Yes, that keeps bacteria out.
Yes, I've heard of willow before, especially for indoor plants. Rooting willow, wow. And you're so blessed that you have willow, because you can make baskets. Mary Kingsley, who's Emma Kingsley there on the screen, she and her daughter have a website called, oh my gosh, Lady Farmer. And they have, it's such a beautiful website. So I just encourage you all to check it out too. That's a great tip. Thank you so much. You're so welcome. I'm going to end here. If you guys have any other questions, the document that I put before the last, so this one that's on pruning, I'm going to put it at the very end. That's editable. So I'm trusting you not to put anything not relevant on there. But if you have any other resources, feel free to share it with the rest of the group there. And if you have any other questions, thank you for posting that your website, Mary. If you have any other questions about pruning from here on, we would love to collect them and make this more comprehensive. But I'm going to end the talk with this reflection. If we find ourselves down in the dumps, broken down by pain, suffering, or anxiety, may we find a moment to take a plant, a shrub, or a tree, go out and prune with our shears or loppers, and go give it a try, go prune. Not with anger, but with love, coaxing that plant into understanding that what we do, as painful as it may seem, is momentary, is necessary for growth and rebirth. It's necessary to maximize its fruit production. What fruits is the Lord wanting me to bear in all of this? Understanding and accepting the meaning of our own pruning can itself be a fruit. And I have an outro song. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to switch links now to the Zoom check-ins. You're welcome. Thank you all for being here. I usually end these things with a song, so there's a little chant here. and then we'll say goodbye.
Everywhere we go, people wanna know, who we are, so we tell them, we are the pruners, low and humble pruners, Ooh, ha, yeah, ooh, ha, yeah, ooh, ha, yeah, ooh.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Bye. Bye.